Welcome back to the Talk Past podcast. This week, I've got one of the more amazing individuals in reenactment history back on the program, if you want to call this that, to discuss probably one of the greatest shows in modern history, at least. I don't know if they had a Buffy back then, but you never know. Uh,
Why not?
of course, yeah. I am the host, usually, NC, and then today's guest I have.
It's me, Katie. I will try really hard not to be nearly as depressing as I was last time.
Oh,
'Cause
no
I
worries, no
realized
worries.
that last time I was like, oh man, I am a Debbie Downer. Jesus.
Not a problem. You got to go up the alphabet. There's an
Yeah.
A pressing, C pressing. You gotta do the E pressing now.
Yeah.
So
I
no
I
worries.
think that involves Molly, which is illegal. I would never do illegal drugs.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of Molly, of course, we're discussing Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which actually has nothing to do with. I don't think there's ever been a Molly in that show.
I was gonna
Uh,
say I think maybe a side character who died really quick.
there is a reference to Molly Ringwald in season, I believe, 2 or 3. But yes, it's season. Oh, Buffy had a birthday like every season. I'm not sure, maybe every other. But one of them, she was discussing about watching a Molly Ringwald movie.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know the
Probably the classic 16 Candles.
yeah, something in the Molly Ringwald oeuvre.
Well, we'll call that a tidy segue.
hmm A tidy segue. But in any case, since it's a medieval podcast, we want to discuss, and of course, this could be like a tangent over several episodes, but we'll condense as much as we can within the hour of medieval history and its sort of ties or influence and inspiration, maybe both indirect as a direct, as well as indirect as an abstract for the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But first, let's do a little introduction on that. When did you start watching?
Ooh, I want to say I was 14 or so. So that would put it, I'm having the math in my brain, like
Yeah.
maybe 2002-ish,
Okay.
2001, roundabouts there.
Kind of on the cusp of the ending there.
Yeah, yeah, because I remember I had a lot of catching up to do, which was
Yes.
nice because then it was syndication. So Saturday mornings were Buffy the Vampire Slayer time.
hmm for me, I think I caught glimpses of season 5 when it was currently running, but I didn't start actually watching it until a couple episodes into season 6, and then season 7 was my full season of Buffy, which nobody needs to watch season 7. That was an absolute disaster season. But you know, the show itself, I think around that time, every season, once when season 6 was coming into, every season from up to 5 was on DVD, so you pretty much get just binge watch it like the pre Netflix days back in I think
Those
it
were
was like
those were
two,
the days.
yeah, 2001 or 2 as
Yeah.
well. Mm. I
Remember
remember. Good.
when I was your age, the internet came in the mail.
Back in my day, we watched Buffy on TV.
And commercials you couldn't fast forward through.
Yeah. Well,
And that the cliffhangers really sucked because you really did have to wait a whole week.
yep. Instead of 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's discuss sort of, well, the medieval influence of Buffy. Of course, I want to divulge first a couple things regarding probably one of my top 3 favorite characters at this point in my life. Giles introduces us to the concept of the show, but he sort of introduces us to the concept by as a means of being pretty much our exposition throughout the show up until maybe around like what season 6, season 7, where he's kind of
Yeah.
just there. But and I don't have the quote because I clearly don't say quotes very well on here. But he once everyone kind of gets an idea of what a vampire is, which is when they started sort of season 1 is like that awkward teen years where they're kind of like not sure what they're doing.
Yeah,
Um,
they're trying to wait, can we make a movie into a TV show? Maybe.
what's a
Maybe.
vampire? What does a vampire do? What is who's this character? Does Xander have a skateboard? No, he doesn't. Uh, and all the little tangents that could have been but never were. But he's like, despite popular myth, as I again do a horrible British accent, uh, the world is far older than you believe, and delves into the history of demons and vampires, and we get that sort of exposition, which to me kind of honestly, Buffy is a little bit more primordial than medieval, but a
Yeah.
lot of the context, if you've noticed, is very sort of gothic medieval.
Well, and I
And
think a lot of the myth around vampires in general, even
mhm,
not even necessarily restricted to the show, is very religious based, and it's
yes,
the classic old school, the one could say perhaps medieval school sort
yes,
of ideas of purity and versus chastity, and
light
what's
versus
going to
darkness.
happen to you, if you're who shows her ankles, well then you get what you get. um, and so a lot of those, I mean, I will say Buffy is like, I feel like this is blasphemy somewhere, kind of the modern day Joan of Arc in a way.
Yeah, she's almost like a sort of like a secular figure in that sort of religious mantra, right?
And
She's
a
kind
lot
of
of
the
people
Joan
think
of
she's
Arc, but she's
crazy.
not secular.
I mean, and you can draw some fun parallels in that a lot of people think she's nuts.
Mhm.
Um, she's got a bunch of close allies who kind of follow her into whatever. One of which is a horrible serial killer.
Mhm.
There you go. You've got a
You
couple of those to
of
pick
course,
from.
if you know Buffy, you have no clue which one we're talking about because it could be any of them,
You've got
except
you've got choices for
for
serial
Xander.
killers.
Yeah. Literally,
Um,
the only one isn't Xander.
yeah. Or I'd say Oz,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
maybe Willow, depending what dimension you're talking about.
Will would be a murderer, I suppose.
In well, Bad Willow would be.
In the singular, yeah.
But yeah, no, there's some fun parallels to be drawn. You know, dying. I think at one point, oh yeah, it's one of the early episodes where Willow's mom finds out she's a witch, and the whole town goes nuts, and like they're trying to like burn her at the stake. I think in the
Mhm.
library.
Indeed, that is the episode Gingerbread. I believe that's the name of it, where we have the demon basically representing Hansel and Gretel, of course, going into those
Oh yes,
German
yes. It was the
fables.
kids who died,
Hmm.
and
It was,
Joyce was following the kids, like, "Oh,
yeah,
help avenge us."
yeah.
I remember
And
now.
sticking Buffy to the ground on this one, uh, I feel like the medieval aspect of Buffy as a context, as a whole, as an abstract, even kind of like is the sort of yin and yang, the light and the dark juxtaposition between you have the medieval, which are the vampires. That's the forces of darkness. That's everything that's trying to drag Buffy down. That's trying to drag her back into the past, trying to keep her from being herself, keep her from having a future, right? And Buffy is desperately trying to stay in the light, desperately trying to stay modern and embrace who she is as a modern individual. Modern, of course, being the '90s, but it kind of boils down to me in a quote in the episode Darla, episode 7, season 1, where we get the introduction to Angel, specifically his past, and Darla kind of becomes a little bit more prominent in that episode. I feel like season 1 they did a lot of mistakes that could have been remedied. Like Darla should have stayed. But she obviously but I'm saying for the audience, Darla has an interaction with Buffy's mom, claiming to be her history tutor, just as Willow was in that episode, which is kind of funny. Willow is the Reconstruction era, and Buffy's like, it's the Reconstruction era that the construction was shoddy, so they had to reconstruct. And I forget what Darla was, but when Giles comes to meet Buffy to check, not Buffy, but Joyce to check on her at the hospital, Joyce kind of asks about why Buffy isn't really getting history. why she's not understanding the past, right, in a school context. But I think this also flows with the show itself because Buffy's always constantly fighting who she is as a Slayer rather than as a modern woman. And Giles, as I cannot do his sexy voice, the way he speaks.
We'll
Um,
imagine it.
mhm, uh, he says, she lives very much in the now, and well, history, of course, is very much about the then, which I think encapsulates Buffy as a person contextually perfectly. You get that yin and yang, and I think that is where sort of the medieval kind of meshes with Buffy, the modern context.
Yeah,
It's sort of kind of the part that we try to escape, I guess, is what I'm trying to say in a very abstract manner. What are your thoughts?
yeah, no, there's something really classic about, the common story that I think everyone can relate to, whether it's I watch too much TV or this is my life, where it's, a matter of, who you're supposed to be versus who you want to be versus who
Mhm.
you actually are. And, there's I think that's one of those, like, as long as there have been humans, this has been a problem, an ongoing, never ending, it's probably not going to stop sort of problem that, it's interesting to think about. And I don't think I haven't seen a lot of, uh, literature talking about kind of those sort
The
of everyday
dichotomy.
problems.
Yeah.
Well, and just the everyday problems that, just your average Joe medieval person would have dealt with. But I mean, you can imagine you did have, religion was very heavily influencing, and there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of religious, like, kind of imagery used with vampires as long as the, legend's been going.
Mhm.
I know they've got other monsters in there and whatnot.
Yeah.
I still think one of my favorites is the haunted house, and it's like the super scary demon, and then it turns out at the end he's like 6 inches tall, so she smushes him with her foot.
Gaknar, yeah.
I love that. I'm just gonna say.
Mhm.
But I mean, with, as far as, the religious beliefs, like, demons were real. You and I mean, we can kind of laugh and be like, ha ha, whatever.
Mhm.
But, at this point, science, I mean, it's in medieval Europe, I should say specifically, science was not the most up and coming. It wasn't the most important thing going on.
Yeah.
And, demons were very real, and hell was real, and heaven is real, and, these are things you have to deal with. And so
Right.
seeing, in modern, entertainment like Buffy, where it's, well, nope, no, she's dealing with that. That is a demon. She is fine. Okay, this is happening. This is
Right.
also real. So
Yeah, the dichotomy of her wanting to be, well, a modern girl in high school. Obviously, she makes reference to this a lot. I think the best one, besides that Giles quote, is her when she's outed in also a sort of parallel of being a child who's also not heterosexual, having any sort of gender identity that isn't the norm. Kind of that parallel when she's outed to her mother as a Slayer. This is around the end of season 2, and she's like, she wishes she could do anything, but but she has to do this. She has to protect the world again. Um, Everything just kind of pulls her into that sort of medieval dichotomy of this is the world strictly as it is to these people, not just demons. Obviously, we get modern demons in there as well, but say the Watchers Council and everything that is situated with all the demons that tend to go after Buffy, at least in that early portion, before we head into like the Mayor and Trick and such, who are a little bit more modern, is very much sort of a dichotomy of that taking modern problems and sort of creating that monster for it that also sort of makes that dichotomy of light and dark and a sort of medieval influence out of it, such as the trio or the three, um, the order
oh
of
yeah.
bounty hunters. that come after her when she well goes after. I think that was season one. Yes, I believe. There's a lot of threes going on in Buffy, but when she because there's also the Order of Taraka. I think that's the same thing. I'm not sure. It's one of those. But anywho, season two, season whatever, season something, something or other. Buffy does something to tick somebody off, and they send three of something at her. This is season two, where the Bounty Hunters Guild, right? And it's what's my line? Except she doesn't get to play. And in the religious context that you mentioned, one thing I noticed with Buffy, obviously we have that sort of blanket medieval influence. You have the monks, the nuns, the clergy. In season five, we have the monks, who are Nathan Fillion, of course, the priest,
Oh, of
the
course.
first evil. Um, in season one, I don't think we have much of a religious context in season one in terms of a like in your face. Um,
Actually, I will say there is a really poignant moment in season one where I want to say it's homecoming, and it's in the opening credits as well, but you can see it, so no spoilers there.
mhm,
But there's a very poignant scene where she is it's after she's already died and come back, and she's standing there in her white dress
mhm,
with the cross around her neck, and she's going to defeat evil. I mean, if that's not, some very, kind of religious imagery happening there,
mhm,
I don't know what, because you've got the purity is going to save us from evil thing
right.
going on, which is very
But
interesting.
but also, I want to mention the dichotomy of that because there is a lot of religious context within Buffy. Very specifically, obviously, when Angel gives her the cross.
Mhm.
Cross seems to be the only thing that works on vampires. You don't see Willow, who is a Jewish character, using any sort of symbolism of the Jewish faith, like the Star of David, to push back Spike or Angel or any of the vampires, which is kind of odd. But everything is sort of blanket. You notice I mentioned earlier Buffy is sort of a secular figure. I remember in season four when she's kind of getting lost in the campus.
Mhm.
First episode actually, showing sort of Buffy kind of out of her element in a new world sort of way, like the high school was her, and then now she's being forced to grow up or something. But someone tries to hand her like a Christ pamphlet for like a meeting for Christians, and just like I think they asked, I don't know if it was a he or she, or other identity, but they asked if she had found Jesus or something of that nature. He's like, well, I meant to find him, but I got lost or something like that, or
Oh yeah, I'll let you know, or let me know if you find them, or so it was some kind of
yeah.
flippant.
But I noticed Buffy as a whole is very sort of a secular show. There is a lot of Christian overtones, but there's also like a very big blanket secularism that kind of stretches across the show itself as well.
Fun
Almost as
Katie
if,
fact.
yeah, almost as
I
if
was not
go
originally
ahead.
allowed to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer because demons
Yeah, which is
and, going to hell and all that stuff.
which
So,
is the weirdest thing. You get a girl who's wearing a cross who maybe she doesn't pray, but she's obviously doing God's work, slaying the forces of hell, and you can't watch that because demons.
yep, no. It
You know,
is trivializing the faith and making a mockery
yeah.
of I don't
Talking about how she believes she went to heaven, but she tells him, "I don't know anything about heaven or dimensions, really. Only that I was happy, only that I was complete, I was finished, and I knew that my friends were okay." To me, it feels like Buffy, at least on the religious aspect, is very abstract in terms of their world, almost as if everything is real, but and yet nothing is real. Like there's dimensions in Buffy that are created that are hell dimensions or alternate dimensions. There's a dimension without shrimp, or a heavenly dimension. It all kind of factors into the lore, if you will, but yet all the same. there's only two real blanket kind of ideologies, which is sort of that old, structured, sort of medieval religious figure that we get in a lot of the ancient and medieval influence from Buffy. And then, of course, there's the secular, which is the modern, which is the present, which is who Buffy wants to be. She's not she's obviously not an atheist, is what I'm trying to apart from secularism, but she's modern. She's about being just a girl in the modern
Yeah,
world.
just a normal human being, who wants that new pair of shoes and, to not be to death by, a whatever demon.
Yeah, by this weird sickle demon.
I
Or
mean,
yeah,
really, I think we can all relate to that new pair
hmm
of shoes and not wanting to be beaten to death by a demon. I
yeah,
think that is
yeah,
a very universal want.
precisely. But divulging a bit back into more of the lore of the concept. Um, we get, of course, in season one, we get probably the most medieval aspect of the show, besides season five, which is the master vampire. He's described. I think he's something of like because Darla's supposed to be like 400 years old. Angel's kind of like 200 something years old. The master's, I think he's supposed to be like 700,
Yeah,
and
he's like the oldest.
oldest like living
Yeah,
demon demon on the show. At the time, that would be what 1997. So minus, we'll say 700 seems about right, right?
yeah.
Um, that's the 13th century. That's coming into the 14th century. So that's pretty much at the height of the medieval era. Um, but it's also there's also references in season two of like crucifixion and whatnot. But I think it's an interesting dichotomy that the most ancient evil up to that point on the show lives underground in a church, and it's like the most again to that point the most medieval aspect of the show where that ancient world is coming to get you. It's coming to try to pull Buffy under. And then she's up above in the sunlight in the modern world. What was your opinion of the Master when you kind of finally got to watch that show first around?
Um, I mean, personally, I thought he was. I mean, it was very much one of those. He was, you know, well, you had characters where you weren't really sure where they stood on the is this a good person or bad person spectrum. Like, oh, looking at you, Angel.
Hmm.
But then with the Master, I mean, that was a really, or even Darla was kind of one of those like gray area. Like, okay, yeah, she's a bad guy, but and she's kind of funny and she's got good taste in clothes for 1997,
Yeah.
and but for seeing that this guy, I mean, he is the bad guy. Later on, you find out not the bad guy, but the bad guy for the time being.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it was definitely one of those you do see. You know, I've always kind of loved the whole um, vampires versus the Christian, specifically church. I always thought that was very interesting. Just because, like, well, why not other churches? Why not, Buddhism or I don't know anything else. But
Yeah, Islam and Judaism and
sure, why
etc.
not?
Shinto, etc.
Um, um, the Baha'i. Um, but I mean, it's definitely always very, he was definitely creepy, and he was definitely, the fact that this original evil is living in a church, like the horror.
Hmm.
So I always thought that was very kind of interesting the way
The way he's
that,
kind of presented.
yeah, and yeah, he's kind of presented as being very like superior in a way to like other vampires and other demons, and he's above them, not just in the pecking order, but like in a
I
more
think
abstract.
at that point,
Whole,
he was the only vampire that had anything above what the other vampires could do.
yeah, like chief vampire,
Mhm.
I guess.
Yeah, his clothing was very Vlad the Impaler, though.
That's very body.
For me, obviously, the humor aside, because that endears you to him as a character. But I found it very fascinating that, and obviously this goes along with some of the other villains of Buffy over the course of the years, from obviously Angel to the first, but the Master's whole gimmick, besides being free, and we see how that turns out later in season 3. And it's I don't want to retread what we've already spoken about in terms of the dichotomy of medieval and modern, and then the religious imagery, but the Master, and then looking at the quote unquote, we'll say monsters or demons, because not all of them are demons. Um, at least in season 1 and then onward. He seems to be the only thing in Buffy at that point that was specifically medieval, that was specifically trying to bring that influence, besides, say, Giles. Giles was probably the only other character that we see that sort of difference of perspective of Giles is medieval, and his influence is very much what we would think, the 14th century, 15th century, the knights, the Valar and the honor and the
Mhm.
concept. And then uh, the Master was to me sort of almost like Viking Age, and earlier almost like Druidic, kind of going into that real archaic time frame. Obviously, I feel Buffy's a little bit more primordial than medieval as it went along, but
Yeah,
that's kind of the Master absolutely cemented that concept of the influence of the sort of high medieval Gothic influence and inspiration, mixed with that very old world, almost lack of written language, Germanic, Druidic, early Anglo-Saxon kind of medieval history,
yeah.
well before even his time, obviously.
Oh,
But
for sure.
that kind of was fascinating because even all the demons around him, Darla included. Darla, of course, was a medieval character. She was 400 years old, so I'm not going to calculate that, but I think that's going into the Renaissance at that point. But she is able to get with the times, if you will, and every other demon is. She was 16th century, so she's going into the Renaissance. Angel obviously is as well beyond that point. Uh, but yet the Master, up until season 3, is still so deeply rooted and the only driving force in the dark aspect of Buffy, the darkness that gives us that aesthetic.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean it boils down to, the classic, good versus evil, the kind of the purity versus, the tainted, from of sin, from the original sin, the only, the original vampire type of thing.
mhm. Kind of like Lucifer, Satan, the devil, if you will, in the more recent Sabrina the Teenage Witch show, which obviously I feel takes a lot from Buffy too.
Oh yeah. I
I
think
don't know if you've
Buffy,
seen
quite frankly, very much, oh dude, I freaking love that show.
that.
Because I remember reading the cartoon, like the comic books,
Hmm.
and it's like Betty and Veronica and Archie and Jughead, and like it's very like happy go, like nothing serious happens in those at all
Hmm.
ever. And then going and watching Sabrina the Teenage Witch and being like, watching, the original one with was it Melissa Joan Hart?
Yep.
And even those, nothing really serious ever happened in those. They were lighthearted, and the good guy always won at the end of the day. And
The sitcom.
yeah, and then watching this, and it's like, oh, we
Mhm.
actually both Rod and I were like taken aback in a good way, but taken
Yeah.
aback.
And of course Buffy does that a little bit every now and then. But
Oh yeah,
of course, moving on a bit, we're gonna skip through seasons and stuff, through concepts and such. Um In season, I think 2 or 3 or somewhere, I definitely wanted to mention sort of some of the things that I think Buffy does right when it takes that sort of, even if it's just abstract, but sometimes a more direct medieval influence and inspiration. I'm talking about things like in season 3, we have the Illuminati. Um, in season 5, I think they are the Knights of Byzantine, which are a thing.
Yeah.
At least the Byzantine, the word, the phrase. I don't think the Buffy part is. And then, of course, we have the monks and such. Um, I find it always kind of fascinating now watching it and seeing those almost sort of direct nods to something medieval or at least ancient in history kind of popping in. Obviously, we
Yeah.
get occasional demon names that are like historical, but they're just, demons. Um, what are your thoughts on sort of those factions? Like in season 3 with the mayor, who is one of my favorite villains, but the Illuminati, obviously a take on the Illuminati, just not as well done. Um, they're trying to stop the mayor from basically ascending, and they're this sort of like medieval vampire group, vampire slash demon group, working for this giant gargantuan demon Balthazar, and then of course the Knights of Byzantine that we get, I think, is a more medieval direct nod in season 5. What are your thoughts on like, those two factions? Maybe more so the Byzantine because it's a little bit more direct. But if you had
Um,
one.
I mean, I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I watched it.
Mhm.
Um, with, I'm trying to remember exactly. Like, I think I can picture them. Um,
So in season
the
3 with
struggle in my brain is happening.
the Illuminati, um, of course the Fates season. Um, let me just write down. I can picture it in my head. Illuminati. But I want to describe what they looked like because here they are. Indeed. Yes. So they're obviously kind of looking weird, but they're those vampires that they don't really look that much medieval actually. But the concept is so they have yellow tabards with these sort of gold arrows going down the tabard, and then they just kind of got like black long sleeve shirts, and they call that medieval. But they're basically looking for a medallion to heal, if you will, the demon Balthazar, who's this giant demon in a bathtub, kind of like Homer Simpson. Uh, and then, of course, the mayor electrocutes him, or Buffy does, but under the mayor's subtle direction. And in season 5, I think is obviously a little bit more direct, a little bit more memorable. We are introduced to the Knights of Byzantine, of which are trying to find they're basically the Knight Templar, right? They're trying to find the key, which is the energy that is created by the monks into Dawn, Buffy's sister. And they're these Knights Templar that just have one goal. They're all in this like dark clothing with tabards, chainmail. They use swords that are probably wall hanger swords. Um, but
Oh,
they
of course
basically
they are.
go after
Weapons.
Buffy because they know she's relevant to the key instead of trying to go after Glory. Uh, of course, because
Did you
why
see
would
what Glory did to Tara? Yeah, no, we're not going after Glory if we don't have to.
even some of them. Um, so I think they were the most direct. They were the ones that kind of went after them on the horses. Remember the Giles or Spike is driving the Winnebago when they're trying to escape. I believe it was Giles, and they're horseback, the Knights of Byzantine, and like throwing spears and javelins and using flails of all things.
Oh yeah,
Hmm.
because that was after Tara got
Yeah.
by
Um,
Glory, and they were trying to run away, and they had like aluminum foil covering the windows for Spike.
yeah, and Tara's like horses, and
Yeah.
Buffy goes up to the front, is like aim for the horses. The Knights of Byzantium, I think, is the most, in my opinion, probably the most direct reference to a medieval influence. Even though obviously they kind of get it wrong anyway. but they're kind of representative of the Knights Templar. If you remember anything of that, if you have any thoughts of that kind of now from our reenactment history.
I mean, it's definitely. I think it's
Byzantium.
there's times where we will tweak history to make it recognizable for people, like what we do
Mhm.
with Scottish years, where most of the time it's, I mean, quite frankly, they weren't wearing kilts, and tartan wasn't really a thing like that yet. And but we tweak it so it makes sense for so the audience can understand what it's supposed to be. And I think as far as the inaccuracies with our knights, I think it's a lot of the kind of same thing. Like, look, we want you to understand that these guys are real old, but they're old fashioned. They're old. They've been around forever. Like, we're gonna make this real easy. So I think that's a lot of what happened with them. But I think having bringing in these kind of special kind of operative groups of ancient knights and ancient these ancient monks and things like that really pulls in that this everything we're dealing with is really really old, and but in a more modern time, and so you get that kind of juxtaposition, and
Yeah, of course.
that's a recurring theme, absolutely.
Yeah, of course, at that point, season five, Glory, Glorificus, is a god. She's the oldest up
Demonstration
until,
is.
say, Illyria. Um, Obviously, Illyria, I think, is a primordial creature, an angel. Glorificus is just a god. But I think that's interesting that to utilize that. In terms of appearance. I'll be honest, they kind of look like what I look like in terms of what horrible medieval, non-medieval costuming I've been wearing. Doing reenactment with a suede tabard and that sort of whole gothic black and gray look.
Look, we all have our costuming aesthetic that we like. To some extent, aesthetics must be maintained. I like having super duper long sleeves that nip in a little bit at the wrist so I can do my little Snape sleeve pull up thing. We all have our aesthetic that must be maintained at the end of the day. And if
Yeah,
it means we're wearing gray and suede and whatever.
indeed, indeed. But
People get the idea.
yeah, but I like that they're wearing chainmail. I mean, basically, they're modern knights. They're a modern version of their ancient order. Um, but they're still in chainmail. They're wearing chainmail underneath. They've got the coif. Um, Everything else is otherwise just kind of leather, which obviously not really a historical thing, but this is also a modern version of that for their order because they're not in ancient history anymore.
Well, and depending on the time frame that they're originally from, chainmail and leather, plate mail had its purposes and had its
Mhm.
things where it was really great, but chain was better for other things. So,
Indeed.
and
Uh,
was more, a lot of times more financially accessible. So,
yeah. Obviously,
doing the
go ahead.
chainmail and the leather is like, these guys are badasses, but we're badasses on a budget. Like we're not going to be ridiculous about this.
Yeah.
And it also pushes them back to an earlier time frame also.
I have to go back to the episode where Buffy first encounters them, which is when she finds out that Glory is a god, and take a look and see if their chainmail is riveted or budded. Riveted, as it turns out, is actually historically accurate. Most chainmail was riveted.
It's also
Budded was
stronger for
really
it.
only for like kind of like horseback, um, which I was, you know, just recently found out because I'm stupid. Uh,
Yeah.
because my chainmail's budded because I like the aesthetic of that. But turns out it's not really a thing.
Well,
So,
it is. I mean, it's just not as high of quality. It was is an earlier the butted was more of an earlier style of chainmail.
yeah,
And then they're like, shit, we rivet these. It's way better. But I
yeah,
mean, as far as practicality goes for modern usages, I mean, for our
yeah.
purposes,
Like
it's way easier to modify butted chainmail than to try to modify riveted.
hmm I think
So
obviously their dichotomy with Glorificus. I don't know if they have any sort of other backstory. The Knights of Byzantium, as they're actually called, not Byzantium. But obviously they're tailored specifically to Glorificus and her minions, the Scablings. Um, so I wonder if there's anything else that they sort of entangle with, right? But they're just like this order wearing traditional medieval clothing and using traditional medieval weapons, going against, although a god, a very super modern god that could kill them in a flick of her pinky.
Yeah.
And I find it fascinating the sort of dichotomy of this group in our modern era dealing with what they deal with, the demons that are still very much archaic, at least in their world that they deal with. Uh, but we only get the glimpse of in season 5 and how that sort of reflects. I would be very interested in learning about some of the more ancient orders and other things that do dwell in the show, such as Glorificus and the Knights of Byzantium and the Scablings and the Illuminati and all these sort of ancient medieval things that we only get glimpses of. Um,
I
like
always love when they take, historical things like the Illuminati and, okay, we're going to tweak them a little bit so we can use them for our purposes. But, you know, it's clearly based on historical groups or events and that sort of thing. It's,
yeah.
you know, why remake the wheel if it's already doing pretty good?
hmm Um, Going a little forward, not in the show, but in conversation. Um, I feel like I mentioned, it's very much a sort of an undertone of primordial in Buffy. The master, the sort of the very concept of medieval influence in season 1, and of course then we have Glorificus and the Knights of Byzantium, and season 3 with the Illuminati, and then so on and so forth, here and there speckled throughout. Of course, Spike's history, Angel's history, Darla's history. Um, there is the ancient ones. As I mentioned at the head here, when Giles refers to the old world, which is mentioned a lot in the show, the old world, the way things were before the medieval period. We're getting into what I'm talking about is the time frame of the first Slayer and
Yeah.
sort of the start of humanity. And I want to kind of digress from Buffy just slightly into Angel. If you've watched Angel, I don't know. I didn't.
I have never watched Angel.
I watched season 1, season 2, skipped 3 and 4 because it was garbage, and watched season 5 because season 5 was basically Buffy season 8 without a doubt, right? All the characters from Buffy that they could get transferred over to Angel season 5.
Nice.
Um, but like my favorite character in Angel, and definitely one of my top 5 favorite characters in the Buffy oeuvre, is introduced in Angel season 5, which is Illyria. Illyria is probably the oldest, besides the first evil, but the oldest character ever to grace the show itself. Um, Probably even more than Malachor in the comic books, and we won't get into the comics. But Illyria is basically just a primordial, just an old one, one of the referenced old ones. In season 1, the Master is trying to resurrect the old ones. That sort of squiggly demon with the Jurassic Park sound effects is one of the old ones. Um, I don't think Akathla is one of the old ones, but there is an episode in the Zeppo where that sort of squiggly demon comes back up, and then season 3, with the mayor wanting to become, I believe it was not
The
Lurko.
purest demon.
Mm-hmm.
Big
Not
old
Lur-
snake dude.
it wasn't Lurkonus, because Lurkonus is the demon that he's paying tribute to, the one that eats the babies.
As
um,
one does.
yeah, of course they saved them. They saved them for some reason. Did them turn into it's a thing. Ulvacon, the demon Ulvacon, which is an old one. and there's always that sort of undertone of primordial ancients, and that's kind of where the primal slayer seems to come in. Giles referenced that the first demon, uh, or at first a demon, fed on the blood of a man, and that man became a demon, and so on and so forth, became vampire. And I find it very fascinating, again, that sort of dichotomy, which I think is represented through maybe the master and Darla. But there is also that sort of undertone of just primeval emotion. I think that's kind of what that's supposed to represent. You've got this sort of gothic medieval, which is trying to drag Buffy into what she is as a slayer. But then in season 5, of course, with starting with Dracula, um, we get that sort of concept of the undertones, and I think a little bit with Adam in season 4, obviously versus science versus magic. But I didn't really care for season 4. But
I mean, you always have the a recurring thing is old versus new.
mhm,
And inevitably old always seems to wind up being bad, which okay, fine. But
yeah,
but it is a reoccurring, that battle and finding the balance in between the two.
yeah. I'm trying to reference in terms of the ancient ones tend to always sort of on Buffy at least represent emotion, like just absolute carnal, primal states, like who we were as animals, sort of an animalistic nature. It's what we are as creatures rather than who we are as people. And I find that also kind of spills into sort of the fears of the medieval world. In medieval history, specifically Norse, and we'll into that in a little bit from season 5 or 6, um, with Anya, but which also is another medieval character. But you notice there's a lot of that sort of that's kind of where all the gods come in, all these creation myths, and all these demons, if you will, are these sort of primal state, these sort of hardcore, just raw emotions of man and woman and just humanity in general kind of coming together. And I feel like that is sort of encapsulated in the ancient ones in Buffy. Um, I find that fascinating.
And kind of that just kind of made me think of, when we did Once and Future King,
Hmm.
and Morgan had her oldest ones. And, I think originally it was three, but not to toot my own horn, but one of my better ideas I've had was, well, what's older than the seven deadly sins? Like nothing. Like those are like the original bad things. And so,
Hmm.
having the seven people based off of, her oldest ones are the seven deadly sins. So,
Right.
kind of bringing in that, this is the oldest and is therefore evilest. Is that a word? Evilest? It's a word now.
Evilist,
It's not.
yeah.
So,
Evilism.
that's kind of one of those where it works really well together. This
Hmm.
is just, that it's old. And the older it is, the more likely it is to probably be really evil. And that's probably the only reason why it survived.
Yeah, yeah.
Weren't you greed? I think you were
Likewise,
greed. No,
I
wait, which
was,
one were
I
you?
was greed. Yeah.
Oh no, were you envy?
Nope, I was greed. Tina was envy. Michael
Oh yeah,
was
gluttony.
hunger, gluttony. Melissa, of course, was anger, wrath, if you will.
I love Melissa to
Um,
pieces, but she's the
mhm,
perfect rat.
oof. But I love that sort of undertone of emotion that kind of comes through Buffy, both just obviously in the modern sense, but also in that sort of dichotomy of the medieval. There's a lot more raw energy and raw emotion that kind of overcomes the characters in their journeys that kind of mirror the old ones, if you will, and how they represent in the show. Um, Buffy, though, being a secular sort of figure, I mean, obviously she's the show is obviously a Christian overtone, but she's a bit more secular. She still has those sort of carnal desires, those carnal needs as a person, and they're kind
Also,
of
fire bad.
mm-hmm, tree pretty.
Fire bad.
Um, I hated that beer episode. It was one of the reasons why I hated season four.
I thought it was
But
hysterical. I'm not gonna lie.
mm, I love that sort of lurch back with the primal slayer, and it's just this sort of it's just the raw state of humanity, the raw state of emotion, and
I think it's at the heart of it all, whether it's 1997 or what is it, 2022 or 1422.
mhm,
It's that kind of at the end of the day, we haven't really changed that much.
no,
Um, and we really, I mean, the fears, well, the context for them, yeah, okay, the context is changed, right? Like
mhm,
I'm, now maybe I'm afraid of, well, actually, maybe not necessarily. I'm afraid of losing my family to a pandemic. Well, look at you, bubonic plague slash COVID. Um, what is it? Those who fail history are doomed to repeat it.
mhm,
Um, and they're kind of one of those where, it just certain things happen over and over again. And, whether it's our Joan of
yeah,
Arc versus Buffy or, talking about old things being bad, it keeps
like
happening.
the most of the monsters are driven by their emotions, by their carnal passions, if you will. Very few of them are sort of stepped into the modern world, like Trick and the
More
demon that the
cerebral.
cerebral, yeah, like the demon that sells them the books of ascension, and so on and so forth. A lot of it is very very deep. I guess is a very cheap word to say, but like just like a tome of Buffy is a tome that you could just go through for years and years and just find this the minutia of both not just the modern and future, but also the past and the deeper past, not just that medieval influence, which of course again is very abstract, uh, in the direct sense. You know, Buffy never does a very direct medieval reference aside from the Knights of Byzantium, but that sort of primeval concept, which we are introduced into, I think, more directly with Dracula. You know, Dracula, though, is supposed to be a very cerebral, a very sort of taken a step back from the world around him character, uh, as influenced in the comic book, it is as really still much like the rest of them, driven by his carnal desires. And I think that kind of speaks to the medieval world too, where everyone's just kind of afraid of of monsters and their carnal desires, and that's why everyone's kind of
They
fighting
lead to sin.
war and this and that.
Yeah, I mean those not having the self control. I mean
Hmm.
that's what leads to sinning and going straight to hell. And so having that repeatedly being at the end of the day, that is kind of the bad guy in a way.
Yeah,
Um, and that's one of those things where is a very common biblical sort of theme, and in medieval times that was
yeah,
definitely one of those where don't show your ankles because it's that very kind of puritanical kind of
yeah.
sort of
It was
concept.
very medieval period. People trying to see them as sort of dumb and almost Neanderthal-like, which the Neanderthals were intelligent as well. They were civilized to their extreme. They weren't animals. But I think a lot of people think of medieval people as dark age, when really there's a lot of intricate art. If you've ever seen just the absolute gobsmacking intricacy of woodworking and metalworking.
No, I mean it's definitely anybody who wants to say, oh, people back then weren't sophisticated, or were trying to think of them as being so different from us. You know how many years and eons it takes for evolution to like really make a dent in a species? You know how long it's been since since medieval times,
Not very
the
long at
world
all.
around us has changed exponentially. We, however, have not. I
Yeah,
mean, and fundamentally, the problems that we have now are so similar to the problems that we had back then because it's still the same, just the different palettes of stupid.
hmm
Um, and that's one of those, where you see modern shows like Buffy and that sort of thing kind of pulling from medieval, storytelling and lore and mythologies, and how it so well with you know, um, current, problems and that sort of thing. It all fits well together because it's the same damn people doing the same damn thing.
yeah,
Um, it's just, now we have electricity and air
yes.
conditioning.
Except, at that point, they didn't have cell phones.
Yeah, no,
Except
I
for
didn't. They
Cordelia.
didn't have Skype, and I mean, the technology has gone a long way, but we have not, and I think that's why you see the same kind of universal truths coming across, century by century,
Mhm.
millennia by millennia, because evolution takes a long time. We haven't been
Yeah.
around long
It's
enough.
kind of funny that some of the demons actually are sort of progressing into the new world, whereas the group themselves are still trapped, even in their modern era, trapped in the same sort of social dichotomy that we've always been in from the medieval period on. Um,
Yeah.
like Moloch, the demon that in season one enters Callie, enters the computer,
Hmm.
and then of course Mr. Trick, who and the master in season three, who wants to bring capitalism and uh, basically factory reset the entire world for vampires, which is brilliant concept for vampires. And of course, the oldest vampire would do that. But sort of the last thing I wanted to discuss, kind of more the theme of the channel, at least my interest of medieval history, is probably one of the weirdest references to medieval history from one of our most endearing characters. I don't know how you feel about Anya, as I shut a door while I'm talking.
Oh, and Yanka.
Mm. But Anya, again, my noises. All right, I've stopped. Anya once dated a troll. Anya is considered, I believe, a Scandinavian during the Viking Age, and as Aud, her name was, and she dated uh, Olaf. Olaf
Hmm.
became the troll. Of course, that is Viking era, which is the prevalent era of the channel. Um, I find it I find it's a little detrimental that they never really fully explored that era. But it was really fun to see that kind of play out with Olaf in his episode in season, I think it's season 5, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, that's the episode where Willow and Anya's sort of jealousy of Xander kind of comes to a head. Um, which I really hated the romance in season 3 between Xander and Willow. That just was out of left field.
It
But
was weird, but a little inevitable, I think.
yeah,
I
it
feel
just
horrible like that.
at that point it was just very awkward.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just really quick and checking the file. Okay, it downloaded. Awesome. I'm pulling up a picture of Olaf now. Oh, of course I only say Olaf. Let me put him Olaf Buffy. Bippity-boop. I wish I did more with Olaf too. Olaf is hilarious. Um,
Well, I think it's kind of one of those where the problems that Anya was having with Olaf
mhm.
are still problems that she's having with Xander. It kind of goes back to that, like, nothing has changed, even though she's a demon now. She wasn't
Yeah,
then, but
yeah. I find it obviously we're this is a TV show that's not necessarily going for historical accuracy. Everything's in abstract, but Olaf is very much a representation of the Vikings at the time, as we mentioned. But physically, like specifically, he has the hammer of the gods, of the Viking gods.
Mjolnir.
Yeah, they literally use
You're that.
Thor's hammer to defeat Glory, and uh, he's got this sort of really kind of like cheap high school play outfit. with a sort of Chewbacca chain from shoulder to waist, with these like weird little fuzzy boots, like a furry. He kind of looks like a furry, but he's got the horns too. What are your thoughts on like Olaf when he kind of first came in?
I mean, costuming aside, costuming is horrible. And is very much that like, all right, we're doing something Viking-y. What do people expect to see? And obviously this is before the show Vikings, where it's a lot more the
Fantasy,
Northmen, where
yeah.
it's clearly more detail is being put into the historical accuracies.
I would say humanization rather than accuracy, but yeah, at least in
Yeah,
terms of Vikings.
yeah,
Northmen, I would say more accuracy.
yeah. Now, but I mean, so it's the costuming's atrocious.
Mhm.
Um, but he's definitely he's kind of a funny, relatable, kind of everyman's just dude.
Yeah,
um, and I like I said, I always appreciate when they when you can see a historical person or item and you can
kinda grasp it.
kind of relate to it in a way. It's
Mhm.
like the bodies exhibits with the plastinated Chinese prisoners, those
Yeah,
ones. I mean I saw that, and the thing that always caught me with those was when you could see tattoos and leftover scars from injuries and whatever, and that very humanizing, that's just like me, or that's just like my cousin. I think kind of Olaf is very much one of those, like, is he a great guy? No, but he's a pretty average guy.
yeah. He's like your sort of like your modern TikTok Chad.
He's a bro.
He likes to, make TikToks about women and, eat fresh, succulent babies,
As one does.
as one does. But, I love that they kinda made Anya a Viking, or at least a Scandinavian, right? She's not really a Viking. Viking is a job, sort of a blanket term. But I like that sort of addition into the show that I wish they kind of used a little bit more in a more deeper sense. Um, with Anya, they used it as a way to definitely more so humanize her as a person. Obviously, up to that point, she's just been a demon that
Yeah.
1,000 years.
Getting that backstory is very relatable.
Yeah, 1,000 years, it's just kinda like, men. And then we see that
We
the reason
haven't changed.
mhm, is because this guy just kinda got drunk and cheated on her. And
As
that
one
also
does.
is where her bunny fear came from, fear of
Look,
losing
man,
her man.
bunnies, if they don't chew, their teeth will just keep growing, okay?
Mhm.
Not completely
Bunnies
wrong.
bunnies are the reason for the musical episode, of course.
I fucking love that episode too.
Mhm. But I love that sort of little but I wish it was expanded on. There's so much lore even with just Anya, and then by extension, you have D'Hoffryn, which was around before that time. Obviously, D'Hoffryn and the Vengeance Demons, all of which coming from very specific points and timelines in the world, from modern era to the medieval period, such as the Viking Age with Anya, I think her name was Ethel. I don't know. She became Halfric, Anya's friend. I think it's kind of a disservice to just sort of blanket everything, kind of. Everything's kind of blanket connected, abstractly connected, in a very, very nice, intricate way. But I wish Buffy kind of delved a little bit more directly in medieval history rather than that abstract.
Yeah.
Um, Specifically, obviously, with our Knights of Byzantium, because that's the traditional medieval that everybody loves, which is the Templar Knights era, and then the Viking Age with Anya and Olaf. Was Is there anything that you wish Buffy had done specifically in that sort of nature? Or touched on with a demon or maybe a character like Anya?
Um, I mean, I like when they pull from, various lore and whatnot that, was been going around for ages. And then they did do that. They did a pretty good job of that. But, seeing that a little bit more often would have been kind of nice. More historically based villains and whatnot. But honestly, I mean, I'm pretty happy. I kind of wish there was more of it. I
Yeah, I
need
think,
I
like,
need some more.
not to
Joss
digress into
Whedon
the
is gross.
yeah, not to digress into the hashtag, but obviously, I'm weirdly enough, I never liked Joss Whedon. Since day one, never liked him. Came across as way too arrogant. He punished his actors for saying no. That's why Buffy stopped, because Sarah didn't like something. She said no. He punished her with a scene in season 6 that drove her away from the show. Blah blah blah. But I wish, if there's one show to bring back, obviously you'd have to do it without Joss. Um, but I feel like at this point, individuals like us who've lived on the show could do the show with the original writers a lot better now than if you had to include Joss Whedon. But I wish, if there was any show we brought back, it would be that, on like Netflix or Paramount Plus or whatever. I feel like Buffy's not getting the love. Every like 5 years, there's a rumor that Buffy's coming back, and then it just kind of fizzles out.
Lies.
Mhm.
Sad lies.
There was a rumor that a writer was gonna bring Buffy back with not Buffy, right? It was gonna be a continuation of the show, and it was gonna be a new Slayer with new modern problems, and that just kinda went nowhere. There was gonna be like a Spike movie that went nowhere. I wish, if there's any show you're gonna bring back, don't bring back Charmed. That was garbage.
Yeah.
Maybe bring back Taxi. That'd be interesting. But Buffy, I would love to see Buffy continued in the current modern climate, and then how that kind of harkens back to that original dichotomy we talked about with the dark and the light, the religious figures, and the medieval being the past that keeps trying to pull Buffy back, or if it's not Buffy, the Slayer, back into that world that she's so desperately trying to stay away from, to find her modern identity.
Yeah. I need more, but at the same time, I think it would just get ruined. I'd be too afraid of somebody ruining it.
Well, that's why they need to hire me as the writer, right?
There we go. Okay, problem
So
solved.
if any of you are listening, hire me as
Get on
the
it.
Joss Whedon, basically, without the Joss Whedon part. I assure you I will not do anything he did. I love James Marsters and have deep respect for all of the cast and crew. You know what I would do? First and foremost, obviously I wouldn't have Buffy, because Sarah's not gonna come back at her age. I'm sure she loves the show, she loves the character, but, Buffy's aged out effectively. We want someone who's kind of hitting the modern young adult. It's always what Buffy's been, is a young adult story. But I would obviously sprinkle and kind of create the lore of the original characters, like Xander and Giles, and specifically Tara and Willow. Like, I would go in and bring Tara back,
Oh, she was so good.
which brings me, as we close out, what was your favorite character?
Ooh, I'm gonna say my favorite overall character because I kind of loved everybody at different points in term, but the one that I consistently, I think, the whole time loved, would be Willow,
Okay.
um, but also Bad Willow.
Yeah, I think that just
um,
kind of encompasses Willow as a whole. Again, that primal dichotomy.
yeah, I really loved, seeing somebody who was kind of like me, kind of bookish, kind of nerdy, just not really quote unquote with it.
Mhm.
It's never really quite like that you see very often. I mean, I think more so now you see it more often, but at that point, not really. Or if they were kind of used as a punchline, and she wasn't. She was a valid contributing member of the Scoobies. So
whereas Willow just immediately becomes like the most integral character, second to Buffy and Giles. Probably maybe even more so than Giles. Overall, my favorite character is Tara.
Mhm.
But I think obviously because Tara comes in kind of at season 4. Um, so I think from the original Buffy concept, which is seasons 1 through 3, my favorite is Giles. As I
I
get
think we all
older,
become Giles in the end.
yeah, as I get older, I want everything Giles has. I want his apartment. I want his life. I want him to his moments of just like sitting back, sipping tea, looking at everybody, going bloody hell. Um, I absolutely love Giles, and beyond that, though, definitely Tara, because I similarly have an abusive background, and have the sort of anxieties that Tara had, and had that friend group that kind of pulled her out of it, and helped her kind of grow and become herself. And
We
then
need you here.
without the immediate being killed once she's finally whole, right?
Yeah.
I feel like she's just the most fulfilling character, the character that has the most change and I think satisfying arc. I think she's probably the only character that actually has an arc in the show that is completed.
Yeah.
Everybody else, I mean, they planned Willow's turn from day 1, but then they just kinda dropped the ball on it.
And
Season
I will
7.
say, I do love, Xander telling her, about the day that they met in kindergarten and she was crying because she broke a crayon,
Mhm,
the yellow crayon.
yeah,
I mean, that's one of those like, oh.
yeah, uh, but, like, they could just drop the ball with her in season 7. Um, and with Tara, I just felt like she very quickly, or maybe slowly, depending on your take, very slowly, but at least certainly became the glue that was holding the entire show together. Like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the entire show, the cast, the story, everything that you were watching kind of got put on Tara's shoulders by the time we reached season 6. Like
Yeah.
Tara became the mother figure for Buffy. She became the father figure, if you will, for Willow. She never really kind of got with Xander and Anya, but whatever. Xander's expendable, as we learned. Um,
But I
she
don't think they
became
really needed a person in their lives, a role in their lives filled like that.
yeah
And in a lot of ways, she was kind of like the mom of the group.
yeah she sort of stepped in when Giles stepped out,
Yeah.
and and maybe as much as Giles was integral to Buffy in season 1 through 3, we kind of needed him there for the exposition and that father figure that Buffy didn't have. Tara became that friend in our group that once they're gone, everything just kind of feels empty. Like we're not really a group anymore because this person's gone. And
Yeah.
to me, season 7 just, among other things, season 7 just really didn't feel like Buffy, specifically because Tara wasn't there. It was
Yeah.
kind of weird. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think Amber Benson, which I'm totally gonna hashtag her in this on this,
Do it.
because I love Amber. Um, if you ever get to this point, I love you. Not in the weird way, just platonic and as an actress. Um,
Big fan.
she did an
Quick,
incredible.
not weird fan.
No, no, I don't worship celebrities. Um, she did an absolute incredible job with the character, bringing that anxiety and that past and the growth to life. Everyone on Buffy was great for the most part, but I love how Amber uh, channeled Tara, and then to see her go was just
I love
unnecessary.
a
Uh,
kick in the emotional dick.
Very much. It was. I think it's a testament to her as an actress and as a character that, for me at least, when Tara was gone, it just wasn't Buffy anymore.
Yeah. She in a lot of ways she was kind of the heart.
hmm that's basically what I'm saying is the character and the actress, at least for me, just became the heart of the show. And
Yeah.
I know Buffy technically is, but it's kind of weird how this just rando character that's just kind of put in because Seth Green had to go make some movies became the thing that you watch the show for. Likewise yourself with Willow. We all sort of find our way of kind of attaching to these characters that technically represent all of us in some way or another at some point in life.
I guess you could kind of say, how it relates to real life. That life is a show, and we all play our part.
Mhm.
You've just gotta just
Yeah,
keep going. I don't know if
indeed.
I ran out of pun on that one.
Mm. We could discuss for years and years and years and episodes, and maybe we will on Buffy in the future for the Talk Past podcast. But so as not to digress too long, we will go ahead and cap this episode, of course, with your host NC and my amazing guest, which you've been on like 3 episodes. This is the third episode now, and not
I
the last.
have. It's lucky number 3.
Indeed, you're one of the 3 that we can't seem to remember from Buffy. Like you guys remember the 3? Uh, to Faith episode. Or but, the 3 anyway,
Oh, those nerds.
indeed, your name Katie, of course. I don't know if we said that earlier. You
Yes,
said you said it.
I think I did.
Um,
I don't know.
I'm gonna make this a thing in every episode of the podcast that you're in. Have you have you progressed in any way, shape, or form with Sagacity Street?
So I've been sticking around a lot,
Mhm.
and having had, some time on my hands. I don't know. It might have something to do with bossa nova now. I don't know. It's getting weird around here. It might have something to do with bossa nova by the time I'm done with it,
Nice.
because I've apparently become obsessed with bossa nova. Send
Better
help.
better than being obsessed with Casablanca.
Hey, never saw it. Take your word on that.
Likewise, likewise. Some reason I don't watch the old shows. But anyway, that is going to be it for this episode of the Talk Past podcast. Of course, we'll see you again in 2 weeks or something. But until then, pippity bop.
Toodles.